Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chamber of Commerce Southern New Jersey's virtual nonprofit council meeting on digital fundraising in a socially distanced economy, sponsored by New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Group, Republic Bank, Stradley Ronan and Stevens & Young. My name is Meredith Laurelier, and I am Executive Vice President of the Chamber. I want to thank the nearly 150 participants that have joined us online today to hear from our friends at White Penny. The pandemic has challenged all of us and accelerated the pace of digital transformation. This digital-first economy is forcing nonprofits, the Chamber included, to revisit their core brand strategy and fundraising initiatives. I would like to thank our nonprofit co-chairs, Greg Wilson, Executive Director of the Legacy Foundation, and Valerie Bickerud, Director of Engagement and Communications for HopeWorks. Thank you both for taking the time out of your busy schedules to help Christina and I develop programming that will meet the needs of the more than 125 nonprofit members of the Chamber. Before I introduce our speakers, please allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, you will see a chat feature. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them using that chat feature. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation, so please do not wait until the end of the presentation to submit your questions. There will be an on-demand version of this presentation sent to attendees later today, and it will also be available on the Chamber's website. With that, please allow me to introduce our speakers. John Kofsky is the co-founder of White Penny, a brand and digital strategy firm in Haddonfield, New Jersey. The firm provides a full suite of creative services ranging from messaging to visual identity design to website design and digital strategy. John is active with both local and international nonprofits, including Camden Fireworks, where he holds studio space, and he is vice chair of the board of Rails to Trails and president of the board of Markheim Arts Center. Travis Coley, director of growth and strategy for White Penny, supports clients to identify expansion paths to accelerate growth, move through leadership and generational ownership transitions, develop pivot strategies to capture new markets and realize business models that scale the business, help shape and execute company exits, and leverage the digital transformation of business models and processes. With that, I would like to hand over the presentation to John and Travis.
Thank you, and it's great to be here today. First of all, we'd like to thank you, Meredith, and the entire team at the Chamber of Commerce, not just for setting up today's webinar, but really for keeping us connected and informed during these most trying times. We'd also like to take a second to express our gratitude to the Nonprofit Council. The work they're doing today is more imperative than ever, and it's truly one of our favorite groups to speak with. I know we've spoke with them on a number of occasions, and we truly believe if we can help advance your causes, you get to serve more people. That's the ultimate win. It's a win for you, it's a win for your constituents, and ultimately it's a win for us. John, how many times have we now spoken in front of the Nonprofit Council?
I think, Travis, this is probably our third at this point. I think, we've enjoyed every time, and I think just to echo that, for us, working with mission-driven organizations is such a huge part and important part of what we do. So we're just really happy to be here today. So thank you all for that.
Yeah, and a quick question, John. Do we always wear the same shirt?
So I know, I was hoping you were going to bring it up. You don't realize this until you get on one of these, that was not planned. But thankfully, Travis, we're on brand. So you look good, but we are very much matching.
All right, well, we'll stay on brand and we'll try to stay on message. So it brings us to the question is, how do we break through communications wise, and how do we decrease friction in fundraising? And the bottom line is it's a noisy world right now. I'm sure this is everybody's 999th webinar, and all of our emails and our social feeds are overflowing with COVID-19 updates. And I think it really, requires us to step back and recognize where are we today. And where we are really is in the future. And it's a digital first world and digital first future. Essentially what's happened during this time is we've compressed 5 years of digital adoption into 9 weeks. And that really brings us to, how to move forward, John. And what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think what we're hearing across all of our clients, for-profit, nonprofit, is everybody just realized that there is so much pressure now to live in a digital first world, right? All of these activities, we were distributed across in-person, person-to-person events, just different ways of communicating, interacting. And now what we're seeing is everything has moved digitally. So we have to kind of reinvent all of that. It's funny, we had a conversation yesterday with a client who said, I almost feel like my cell phone now is old technology because we've just moved into a completely new way of interacting digitally. So I think as we look at that, the conversation that we're having is, so how do we adapt? How do we help our clients, organizations, nonprofits think about those changes and then come up with tactical ways to implement new strategies amidst where the world is? So what we're going to talk about today, spend a lot of time talking about this idea of friction. You'll hear this word a lot. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. We're going to talk about what this means to you and how we can put some strategies in place for your organization to help decrease friction. Travis, can you talk a little bit about, just to kind of give a background on, what do we mean when we say friction?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is the world is a noisy place, especially digitally. And in a pandemic, it only becomes noisier. And really, with disruption comes opportunity. And the reality is now, through the adoption of digital transformation and technology, we have the ability to isolate micro communities and create seamless ways to communicate with them and create organic experiences for them. But we have to remember that at each touch point, whether it's in communications or it's in the digital giving process, we have to strip out friction. And what friction is either making the reader work or making the donor or giver jump through a bunch of hoops to transact. So we've got to rethink all those processes. We've got to rethink all the communications and strip them down and make them really focused and easy to use, seamless.
And what we're going to talk about today, we're going to kind of frame the conversation in three parts. So the first piece being storytelling. As we talk about nonprofits, the fundamental tenet has to be this idea of how are you communicating your core mission, your narrative, and doing that in a engaging storytelling capacity. And what we tend to talk to nonprofits about is, don't tell us, show us. Like, how are you showing, living, embodying that mission of your organization? The second would just be the communication vehicles themselves. So how are you doing that? What are those outbound channels that you're using? And how do you, to Travis's comment, effectively break through that noise? If everybody is on overload these days, inbox is just full of content and information. How do you get through that? And then the third is that giving, that transaction process itself. If someone has the intent and you have moved them through a process where they are now supporting the organization and interested in giving, how do we make that process easy for them? How do we ensure that we don't lose them at that critical step? So as you look at these examples, this sort of shows a lot of what we've seen in the world in the past, right? In the storytelling, there's a lot of focus on mission, and mission for a nonprofit is so important, and an ability to articulate that message and that mission is so important. But how do you do it? The string of words, we sort of call this as just wall of text, isn't an engaging way to speak to your end user. So how can we better do that? The same goes for the communication for the email. If you look at this in the center of the screen, I see these every day come through my inbox. And the first reaction I have is, I'm going to have to do a lot of work to parse that information. That then leads me to either not do that or say, I'll do that later. So how do we kind of simplify that process for your users? And then the third is the giving. If you look at that example there, if I were to come to that page, I would probably say to myself, that looks like I have to do a lot of work. I want to do it, but there are a lot of steps. There's just a lot that I'm going to have to go through to give you money. How do we make that easier for someone?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is, we like Amazon, we like PayPal, we like Netflix, and it's because it's easy. They don't make us work.
That's right. And I think we saw, that the emergence of this, the kind of frictionless idea, we started to see it. It came with frictionless payments. Like, that was how this started. You saw, I could get in a car, I could take an Uber, and I could get out. I didn't have to do anything. I could go to a store and I could pay with my phone. As we moved expectations there, what we're going to have to do is move all of these other digital touch points into that same way of streamlined thinking. So the first piece that we'll talk about will be the storytelling aspect. And for an organization like yours, storytelling is essentially the way that you connect your mission with the end constituency, whoever that is. So how do we personify that mission? So if we look at examples of this, Human Rights Watch has always been a nice leader in this space, in that they put real people, real names, real quotes with the work they're doing. So in email outreach and with calls to action for donations, they are saying, like, this is a person that is impacted by this. This is the person we are supporting. They're trying to bridge that gap and make the connection between your donation, your connection to them, and the actual impact on the end user. The second one down below is a video from a longtime partner of ours, Jets Human Services, that they show at their annual Strictly Business event. I actually watched this video, so either last year or the year before, and it's a really compelling way to condensely pack up these stories of impact. And I can tell you, in those rooms, you know, they have hundreds of people in this event. There isn't a dry eye during this moment of the presentation. And the really incredible part that that organization has been able to adopt is that they do in-room giving via text. So as you're having this strong connection to someone's story and the work of the organization, you can actually text one number in and make a donation live to the organization that they're kind of tallying throughout that event. So we bring this up to say it's finding ways to really look at your organization and say, we know what we're about. You know, nonprofits are very good at articulating, identifying a mission, but how are you showing the impact of the mission in story form? And are you doing that across multiple channels? We have to acknowledge that people consume data and learn differently. So some people, they want to see the visual, they want to see the photo, they want to see the language. Some people, it's all video. That's the way that they want to interact. Can you develop those different channels and really connect people with any constituency?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think the big unlock here is great storytelling and great branding today. The shift that's happening is it's about taking the consumer, the constituent, and putting them at the center of the story. It's not about you, it's about them. And as the nonprofit, it's really about becoming the guide. So you put the consumer, end user at the center of the story, and you bring them through that story and that process as their guide. It's much more impactful today.
So the next piece is actually looking at the ways that you're communicating your outbound strategy. So if email outreach continues to be a dominant form of communication, we have to look at how we're doing that. Again, I'm going to continue to say, I think email traffic has just gone up and up and up. We're seeing so many different types of communication. So there's really this focus now on how do I break through and how do I streamline my approach? You look at this email that we have kind of ghosted out in the background. This is an Oxfam email that if you had asked me a year ago, I probably would have said that's a really good example of current best practices. Segmented content, clear calls to action. You know where you are on the page. You know what you're supposed to do. And I think what we're seeing now as we look at the data in the past year or so, but now especially with what's happened, we're moving much more toward this idea of singular focus email outreach, singular focus messaging. So this is an example from Charity Water. They have been really at the lead in terms of online outreach and online giving. How can I say to someone, this is what my message is about. This is what the call to action is. I want you to do one thing with this email. And fundamentally, what we're trying to avoid is the read later behavior. The second that someone says, this looks great, I'm going to read this on Saturday, and they put it in that folder, just more often than not, they don't get back to that folder. So the goal here is, can you really drill that message down, and can you come up with very simple, clear calls to action around a singular message?
Yeah, I think it comes down to two questions. Who's your audience? Why do they give? And if you can simplify it down to that and create a call to action, you have a much better chance of breaking through.
Yep. So part of the nonprofit playbook that we've talked about over years, and it's sort of fascinating, it's really unique to the nonprofit space, is the in-person annual fundraiser model. So you have so many organizations that they build their strategy around these anchor events. So you take an organization like this, St. Baldrick's, 40% of their revenue comes from in-person annual events. They're big on doing these shaving events. Everybody gets together, they shave their head, they raise a ton of money. The problem is that's right now either off the table or postponed indefinitely. So what do you do? So when we look at something like this, we say, you know, this organization quickly pivoted and figured out, I have to do this online, right? I have to figure out how to move something that was an in-person activity and shift it to the digital space. But I think more than that, this is a real moment in time opportunity for organizations to say, is there a way to come up with the anchor fundraising idea that is more closely aligned to what we do? What I love about this, what I love about the virtual shaving idea, is that they're trying to put an end to childhood cancer. So the event is so tied to the mission and tied to what their work is about. I love the golf events. I love the dinners. I think that they are a critical part of organization strategy. But I think now, if they're off the table, can we think about this differently and say, okay, how can we come up with something that not only engages people in a fundraising capacity, but really connects with us, connects with what we do and what we're about?
Yeah, I mean, how do you identify the micro audience, throw out the old playbook, craft unique organic experiences that drive connectivity and ultimately conversion? I mean, that's how you drive brand.
All right, let's get the screen here. So as we talk about friction, I think at the top of the friction conversation is always going to be the giving, the transaction itself. So if we look at this, we say, okay, someone has the positive intent. They've come here. You have done the work to drive them to a page. One of the most staggering statistics that we look at when we work with nonprofits is the bounce rate on a donation page, which basically indicates that someone has come here with intent and for some reason they're not making that transaction. No different than if in a for-profit world, if someone's selling something, you got them here, why didn't they complete that transaction? And sometimes that's because they may look at that and say, great, I want to do that. I'm going to do it later. I don't have time to get through that now. It's too dense. How do we get them to see how simplified this process can be? Charity Water, again, example of a leader in this. Very easy for them to move you through a process. Click a dollar amount, enter your information. You can be out of this transaction within seconds to minutes. They've really streamlined how they move you through that process.
Yeah, great example of how digital can decrease friction.
So the final piece that we would talk about here, and I think this is going to be a continued trend. We've seen it in the past. It's really been amplified in past months, and our sense is from what we're watching and what we're hearing from our clients, is just going to continue in the future. This shift toward personalization. Missions, and I said this a little earlier, the mission of an organization can sometimes be an abstraction. And what you're trying to do is say, how do we personalize every aspect of that? And a strategy that people are really moving toward is that peer-to-peer fundraising idea. So you saw this emerge years ago around, it started with kind of the walkathon events, right? I have a target, I want you to help me hit that target. Here's my goal. Can you help me chip away at that goal? What's really happened now, and the move that we've seen now in the past year or so, and increasingly in the past months, is how can an organization give you the tools to effectively roll out a fundraiser on their behalf in a frictionless way? So the best examples of this are those organizations that are giving you the full playbook. They're saying, here's the image that I want you to post on your social feed. Here's the content that I want you to post. Here's an email you could send out. Take all of the work out of it on behalf of that person and just give them the tools to do that. And I think the takeaway here is that people will support other people in their networks. So, and even anecdotally, I've seen that I do this. I'll see something from someone, even someone I'm not that connected with anymore. And in my head, I say, I didn't know that was important to you. It's important to me too. And I'll make that donation. They've suddenly just connected me back to the organization that they care about. So ways to personalize this whole experience and take it out of the abstract and really put faces around it.
Yeah, 100%. It comes down to micro audiences plus leveraging technology, tell stories that are worth spreading, and you've got network effect.
Yep. Awesome. So a couple of takeaways before we move into a conversation with Lauren. We always, as we talk about this, we're always sensitive to the fact that you walk away from a conversation like this and you say, what do I do? Like, what are the tangible steps that I could implement in my organization? And again, we're open. We'd love to answer any questions anyone has on this, but here are the 5 things that we would say, just as top level kind of strategies to take back. The first is this idea that now is the time to refine the core narrative. If everything is noisy, make sure you're articulating why your organization exists, what you're doing, and find better ways to tell that story. Figure out how to take that story and put it into a human, kind of high touch in the digital space language. The second is, how do you do that? So make sure that you're using a varied outreach approach. Words, photo, videos, use them all. Kind of, it's built in the aggregate. Use them all to connect people to who you are and the work and the impact. The third is, I'm going to just continue to say everyone is on communication overload. Know that and think about that as you're putting anything into the market. If that's the starting point and that's where your audience is, how can you streamline? How can you do whatever you're doing with less? How can you kind of pare back that story? Fourth is, if you're asking something of someone, make saying yes easy. So the donation process, I would encourage anyone with an online donation process to go look at that process. Ask 10 people you know to go look at it. Give $1 and say, go through this process. How is it? How simple is it for you to take out your credit card and give money to this organization? And are there ways to simplify that process? And then the fifth would be personalizing everything, from how you share the stories to how you engage donors. Put a face on this. Don't let these conversations be in the abstract. Show the work, show the people, and then use your audience, use your loyalists, your supporters, your donors to help spread that message to other people.
So if you'd indulge us, we'd like to take about 1.5 minutes to show a quick video. And we just think it's a great piece of organic storytelling. And frankly, it works for for-profit or nonprofit. And we just think it's a great way to highlight this conversation.
My name is Sam Hollis. I'm 26 years old and I live in London in the UK. My nickname is Super Sam. I am a triathlete. I just have autism and I'm going to be awesome. Sometimes when I go to an event, I am the only black triathlete and maybe the only one with autism. Autism is an advantage. I am very focused and I'm not easily distracted. I train hard and want to be successful. I just never give up. If other athletes pass me, I want to catch with them and get back in front. Now, come on, legs, go faster, get to the front. Most people don't understand autism. If I can show people that someone with autism can be a successful triathlete, then it will motivate people.
I don't know about you, but after spending just 1.5 minutes with Sam, I'm on his team. I want to support him and whatever he's trying to achieve. And I think that's just a perfect microcosm of what we've been talking about here this morning.
So, Lauren, I'd just like to kind of pose that question to you. You and I have a long history of a love of swimming and swimming conversations. What do you think of something like that video, and how does that apply to the work you do?
Yeah, thanks.
Impacting and taking that storytelling approach into your world.
Thank you, John and Travis and Meredith. Thanks for having me. And yeah, it's nice to see a beautiful video that really relates to a story that we can all connect to, and in particular, stories that you and I have shared, John, of personal love and interest for swimming and sports. I think what's so beautiful about that is that, like Travis said, you don't know about everyone else, but you want to be on Sam's team. I think it struck on a lot of the things that you guys covered off on in this first half hour about really individualizing and simplifying the conversation and making it about this individual's journey. I think the beauty of the cinematography is sort of what captured me, because you're not just looking at the words or looking at this individual, but you're seeing motion and seeing different portions and way to look at this story. So from a nonprofit perspective, that's exactly the tone and the balance that we all strive to create, is how to get across like the main topic, the main category. In this instance, it's, you know, sports, but also someone with a disability, and how to leave the viewer hungry for more, so that they go and they learn more.
Yeah, great example, I think, of taking you on Sam's journey during his day and his training. We've gotten to know you over the last 2 years, and, you know, it's been a real pleasure. But I guess for the, you know, benefit of the wider audience, would you mind giving us a bit of your personal and professional background, and how, you know, the journey you took from for-profit to end up running one of the larger, or helping to run one of the larger non-for-profit health and human services organizations in the Philadelphia area?
Yeah, thanks. So I started in corporate communications. So I'm like traditionally communications trained, if you will. And early on in my career, had an internship in the nonprofit world. And when I look back on that, I think it really was serendipitous and sort of a premonition of where I'd go further along in my career. I don't think I knew it at the time, but it really stuck with me in terms of being able to do work that you feel passionate about, and that you have maybe a skill set on. Like with me, communication, something I just naturally took to from an early age, but being able to anchor that on something that you can feel really good about. So to sort of align your work against something that you know furthers the lives of people in a positive way. So that was sort of ingrained in me early. I took a pretty traditional corporate communications approach. I've done some work in more classic marketing, classic public relations, and ultimately worked for a healthcare startup for a number of years, and was on a small and nimble and like real, you know, scrappy team that was doing anything and everything to get our message to stick. And fortunately, that with that healthcare startup, it did stick, and that led me to Peach MC, where you know, I carried sort of over a love of communications and healthcare, and then was able to apply that to a much broader portfolio and a much broader definition of health and public health. And, you know, was fortunate to join PHMC at a time where they were intentionally looking for leaders that had different cross-sector experience. So not just, you know, classic nonprofit or government or public funded work, but had sort of different experiences to help round out that team.
Awesome. And maybe just, you know, high level, you know, talk maybe a little bit more, drill down on the organization PHMC and its impact on the Philadelphia community.
Yeah, so Public Health Management Corporation is PHMC. We've been around for about 50 years. We started as a partner to government, and we still hold true to that mission now. We define public health really broadly and very intentionally, because we believe there's so many different ways to positively impact someone's health, wellness, and their experience in the community. So Public Health Management Corporation is a large network of programs and subsidiary organizations, mainly funded by local, state, and federal government, but we also, and we'll talk about this, also have a number of foundations that support our work. And we serve the greater Philadelphia region. What we strive to do is not just create a diverse portfolio that can meet the needs of communities, but that can work amongst each other. So how do we, we strive to be creative amongst our own large business portfolio to be able to integrate services that further meet the needs of our communities.
Awesome. So Lauren, if the conversation today is about adaptation, right, and how are we changing communication strategies, what have you and your team done? How have you thought about the past months, and what are the things that you've rolled out amidst kind of COVID-19 and need to pivot?
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I think the first slide of your presentation where you said seemingly overnight everything changed, right? And I think that in many ways everything changed, and in many ways a lot of things have stayed the same. Meaning we have to be diligent about knowing our audience, be diligent about our message, and continue to build trust with those that we're communicating to, whether that's across our organization or external stakeholders. So some of the most immediate things we did was we doubled down on what was already in place and what we had some data or anecdotal feedback on that was working. So for PHMC, what that meant was mainly email communications, but sort of group leadership meetings, pushing out messages, talking points, using our online platforms like our intranet, our website, in connection with stakeholders, and just immediately doubled down on that, which ultimately led to a little bit of the noise, right, that you referred to. But then once we all sort of got our wits about us a little bit, we took a pause, and we pulled back from some of that ongoing communication where people felt like they just needed constant information at the beginning because of how quickly the situation was changing. And we either sharpened existing channels like messages from our CEO or our intranet, and in a few cases we created new channels. So some of those are bi-weekly engagement discussions with our full employee component, which we were doing for project-based work or sort of on an annual basis, but we weren't doing as frequently. So we stood that up pretty quickly. That's an example of internally something we created, which I think will sort of like stand the test of time. We're getting some feedback now to see if we continue that on the other side of this crisis. And externally, one of the things we did was we had a series of relationships with other regional public health institutes and state health associations, and we stood up what we call a public health hangout. And now we do sort of a weekly conversation with external partners who, maybe 6 months ago we would have waited for a conference or waited for a quarterly event, but we sort of immediately got together to start talking about what we could do.
You mentioned that phrase "stood up" a few times and stood up quickly. I think that's something we've heard a lot. This idea that you're almost amazed at what you can do when you're forced to do it. Did you find that with the organization, that suddenly what would have taken a year was now able to be done in 2 months and kind of
totally
roll out?
Yeah, I think like all of us in this situation, the amount of the complexity of change that we've all experienced, both professionally and certainly personally, is complex, right? Is detailed and is layered. And I think what our team specifically has realized is that things that were seemingly important before may not have been so important or aren't important in this quote unquote new normal. So certainly, we want to make sure that things are thoughtful and that the images are right and that we're copy editing and, not rushing, but we're trying not to overthink so that we can be responsive to the needs around us.
Yep, makes sense.
So given that it's a noisy world and, it appears that we're sort of moving through these phases of reopening, have to always anticipate another spike or future disruptions. And kind of further this conversation around communications and breaking through, any as a leader of crisis communications and effective communications, any pro tips you can share around breaking through in particular?
Yeah, well, I think as a communications professional, we know that you can tell people something and then you can tell them again and you're going to need to tell them again, right? Like that's how we absorb information. We're drawn to what catches our eye or what relates to us in the moment. So what we've tried to do is not sort of like add to that noise by telling people more, but maybe be specific where we can tell people in a different way and then test that they heard it. So, we are doing this survey, like I said, but we're working with leaders or smaller groups of people to see how things were received and to sort of get a pulse to if our message was really received the way that it was intended. And, I'd say that, to echo what you and John were discussing earlier, simple is better. And I think we're really put to the test to say more with less and to really hold ourselves accountable in doing that.
Yep. So how about across nonprofits? You and I have talked about, and we've seen this for years. You are in a culture that relies on convening, collaborating.
what does the future look like? How do you think about that, given that that's such a core part of how you do your work?
Yeah, it's a little cliche, but I think you also referred to it earlier. The future is now, right? I mean, we were thrust into this pretty quickly, and where we may have taken, 6, 7, 8 months to perfect the perfect conference. We stood up this, weekly public health hangout pretty quickly. And I think that's an example of the convening and the collaborating. And one of the things that we've realized through that, saying, let's not wait until we can be back together in person. Let's not wait until groups of 25 can gather safely and effectively. Let's use the tools at our disposal and let's start these conversations, because what we're experiencing is likely amongst different organizations is likely more similar, right? Than we would have thought. And I think what this whole situation is showing us is that the pause in the system is there's a lot of downstream impacts that I think we all know our region is experiencing and will experience more so in the future. So from a public health perspective, I think we're realizing that convening is more important than ever. And we're trying to continue to do that now, but we're really thinking about what that's going to look like into the future, to not just collaborate and get together with like-minded individuals, but to really solve problems. So, we were convening conversations such as how organizations like ours are managing through school closures. And what you realize is that it's not just about schools closing, but it's about housing instability, food insecurity, safe and well-being for our kids. And so we have a lot of people that are using those conversations to say, well, then how are we solving for these issues into the future?
Yep.
So shifting the topic towards funding and fundraising, maybe we'll start, sort of with a more global view of how do you consider now the funding mix? So many nonprofits obviously depend on a significant portion of their funding from direct ask and giving and other events. But maybe, pull the lens back a little bit and think wider scope about how you think about government, grants, payers, and fundraising. And, the world's different now. We have to look at the revenue mix differently. And what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that, some of the classic best practices still continue to ring true in this environment, but even more so. So, I would always say that it's important to diversify funding sources and diversify your donor mix so that you're not relying on one particular funding stream that could upend at any moment or could, flip on its head given factors outside of your control. So, I would say for for-profits, for nonprofits, to diversify the way that you're receiving your funding and then therefore doing your work is always important to consider. And then in a time like now, it's remembering what works and going to those funding streams that you've relied on and reminding people, hey guys, we're here, we're strong. Here's how we're responding to COVID, or here's how our organization is thriving in light of COVID, whatever the specific situation may be, maintain that relationship, but use this time to not be afraid to open up conversations outside of maybe that tried and true donor or funding stream. Because I think you'll find that similar to sort of us all sort of looking at where, if we're able to, where we can give personally and what causes we're aligning to and what drive us, there's foundations and donors that are doing the same thing and are thinking about the world being turned upside down and what needs have come out of this that maybe your organization is prepared to solve for. So don't be afraid to sort of have new conversations and maybe vision together with new concepts.
Yep. So as you look at your portfolio and you look at the organizations, where's the innovation? One of the biggest challenges in conversations we have is you can talk about it in the abstract, right? Now's the time to innovate. We need to try new things. The hardest thing is figuring out what is that, try to actually put those examples together. What are you seeing? Do things emerge? Have you heard conversations or people saying, hey, this is where we're going to go. This is where we think there's opportunity?
Yeah, I think that some of the best innovations that I've seen aren't, a bunch of, thought leaders sitting in a room, or, the classic organizations that have a seat at the table. It's grassroots. And it's people who see a need and are resilient in their approach to either find a solution or get, maybe a group or leaders or someone with funding and means to pay attention to what that solution can be. So, an example of that is we've been talking for some time at Peach&C about expanding the capacity of our call center.
Mm-hmm.
We have process flows and workflows and our IT team and investment and funding and all the things. And, when COVID hit, we had a group of, I would say sort of like director level managers in the field who said, this need is now, we have to do this. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's the workflow, and let's go get it. And we're sitting back and we're watching it. We're watching it, and we're supporting and investing in all those things. But I think that's an example of perfect is the enemy of good. Let's not overthink it. We have the ability to innovate. And when you see that, and you see that there's capacity there, give it some space and let it bloom.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that idea of the speed component is such an important theme to this. We've seen with our own business, we've seen with clients, it is incredible what you can do when you remove the barriers that you put in place. So you say, you know what, we don't have the 9 months, we have to do this in 2 weeks, and just go, just keep moving, keep innovating, kind of bring that creativity to it. And it's pretty incredible what can happen.
Yeah, continuing to pull on that thread. Any specific examples of technology you're leveraging to reach your constituents, whether end users, donors, internal, external, that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that we had thought about internally at Peach&C, but then didn't really double down on our efforts when the time was right, was launching in partnership with an organization called Philanthropy, launching an online individual giving platform for our employees. So, we've always, we're a mission-driven organization, and we've always been really proud of fostering a culture of employee giving. And in the spirit of, simplicity and online modules and sort of reaching people where they're at, we set that up and got that information out pretty quickly to employees to be able to foster continuation and engagement in giving. So that's one thing on the internal side. I'd say that, externally for us and with funders, it was, immediate calls and immediate conversations, tried and true, sort of picking up the phone and saying, we're here, we're working, we're doing this. What's of interest to you? And then we're trying to use technology to tell these stories visually to give clarity and certainty to the human interest aspect of the work that Peach&C and our programs and subsidiaries have been known for, but to give like a visual element and a sort of confirmation of approach with donors who have trusted us for years and hopefully will continue to do so.
Yeah, that's really, those are great examples, great uses of off-the-shelf technology that's there. And, if we swing that back to sort of the for-profit world, that's a great example of, it's always easier to drive conversations with those that are already connected to your organizations, whether they're internal or they're existing end users. And it's easier to deepen that relationship. And in times of noise, reverting back to known groups, known, micro parties can drive impact more immediately than trying to cast wider nets. So, that's interesting. And that's something we're seeing both on the for and the nonprofit side.
Sure. So even Lauren, stepping outside of your organization, just you as a person amidst quarantine, what's come across your path in terms of innovation and new fundraising? Anything catch your eye? We continue to look for this, and I think everybody probably on this today is thinking that way. What should I be trying? Have you seen anything that's interesting, appealing? You see opportunity in an idea?
Yeah, well, I'll give a nod and some kudos to HopeWorks in South Jersey, who is a strong part of the chamber. They were mentioned earlier. I know they're doing some great work in, creating some podcasts with their alumni and storytelling in a way that demonstrates their capacity and their results and their positive stories, and then connecting with donors or potential supporters. So, again, it's the best practice of knowing how to tell your story and what's compelling and who's going to be interested in that, but using maybe a different technology or a different way to get that across. I like to see that, and different ways for people to receive information is always important. I think for me, from a personal perspective, I think that what's really breaking through the clutter is when you see a organization or a story that really hits at what's important to me, and where I'm sitting right now at this point in time. And it's hard for organizations to know that, but I can tell you what's top of mind for me is schools and wellness for our children and child welfare. Really shining a light on some of the inequities that have existed in our system for a long time and are much more paramount and striking right now in light of what we're all in the midst of. So, I guess I'd answer that by saying, back to having a sense of what is compelling to those around you, and then doing what you can to meet that person where they are.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's a really, really important thread here, is not only understanding where the world is, but that idea of meeting them where they are goes to the kind of age-old segmentation idea. Identify who you're talking to and identify who you're talking to and ways to then meet them where they are and understand the messages that they want from you. I think it also breaks down as we look at different generations, right? People connect with organizations differently. One of the things we've been tracking a little bit is around younger generations of giving, and what do they want? And there's this emergence of the productized fundraising idea, which is we got together and we did this celebrity chef cookbook, and all of the proceeds go to the organization. You saw a lot of the photographers doing kind of quarantine photography. We have a close friend who was doing that. He did an amazing job. And, he thought it was just kind of a nice little thing he was going to do, raised a ton of money for a local nonprofit. How to kind of give something as well to say, hey, here's a thing. There's a little bit more of that transaction level, but we are directly tying to an organization on the end of it. So just to that kind of new strategies and meeting people where they are, I think that's a really good thread.
I agree. One thing I'll just add to that is that I think there's also this notion that I can personally get behind about all being in this together. Yeah. So, we're all sort of feeling it in different ways, some certainly more than others. And how are we, how are you helping people understand that there's an accountability and a responsibility of us all to sort of be part of the solution, whether that's from a financial perspective or donating your time or offering a solution. And another thing that I like to see is when you see organizations come together to then be able to say, hey, we're in this together, and here's a solution we're working on jointly. Because I think it helps me as a consumer recognize that, yes, organizations, need to fundraise and need to be financially solvent, but at the same time, we can break down barriers and not be so competitive and try to go at solutions arm in arm.
Yep.
So as we look to transition this to opening up to some questions to the entire panel from Meredith, from the audience, just one last question, actually, to both John and Lauren. You both serve on boards of nonprofits, both locally and nationally. And Lauren, you're obviously a C-suite leader. Talk a little bit about, how do you drive adaptation and change within an organization? I think, one of the things John and I have noticed over the last 2 years is, that sometimes communications, fundraising, digital adoption sort of gets siloed within an organization. And that has an impact on the pace of change. maybe you can talk a little bit about how you drive change, because, we'll go back to one of the original statements made, and that is, we kind of woke up, we did. We woke up 9 weeks later, and we've essentially fast forward the adoption of technology from our consumer and our constituent end by 5 years.
Yeah, so I think that it's a great question. I mean, I think everyone wants to participate in the conversation and understand the best practice on how to drive change and how to innovate. Something that I said earlier is I think rings true here. Try not to overthink it. And if you've been trying to sort of drive change or drive to a big initiative, but you were looking for funding or organizational sponsorship or investment, I think now is an opportunity to be able to shine a light on the fact that some of these things that seemed like a nice to have before are imperative in our new normal. And we can't wait anymore. So, we want to be thoughtful and we want to be good stewards of our dollars, certainly. But at the same time, we want to be able to carve out some time and space and invest in what we've maybe been waiting on because we just didn't have the time or the capacity to do it. And certainly at PHMC, that's true with some major technology innovations we've been working on that are, I'd say, even more full steam ahead than they were before in terms of data and data integration. And on one of the boards I serve on, same thing, we've been thinking about, brand and website and things like that. And it's full steam ahead. I don't even think we took a breath pause here because we realize that now more than ever, everything we've been talking about, our story needs to be clear.
Yeah, Travis, I think what I see too on my side, this is a really unique opportunity in time to be bold. And I think the danger now is saying, I'm just going to keep doing what we've been doing. This will end and it'll return and we're going to go back to those same strategies. So I can tell you for Rails to Trails, the one board I serve on, that leadership was very swift to say, look, we have a problem here. Our whole donor model is built on nurturing new relationships and sort of moving them up that donor path from initial funds to kind of moving them up to larger gifts. We took out the beginning. How do you do that? This medium has proven to be very effective for conversations like this and conversations once you know someone. But the early conversation, the kind of meet and greet, meet in an event, kind of build up to a relationship is very, very hard to do. So I think that's where, when I say be bold, this is the time to say, okay, we have to throw that out. That is not how our model can work. So what are we going to do now? What's going to replace it?
All right, Meredith, we'll swing it over to you.
Okay, so we've gotten a lot of really good questions. I tried to organize them by topic. So the first questions we have are regarding reaching out, your audience and your donors and what kind of the best approach is at this point. So the first question is, obviously there's a lot of overload of noise, especially via email. What you suggest for nonprofits to get their message opened, and is email or social media the better way to get your message seen and heard right now?
Great question. I mean, I'll start. Anybody wants to jump in? I would say different mediums are for different things. So I would say that the thing about email is that you're controlling who you're talking to, right? So it's a much more closed conversation. So I think when you want something specific, more call and response, email is great. Social, I look at as seeing an organization from the outside and kind of creating an outline of an organization. So when someone looks at what you're doing, they get a sense of, here's why they exist, here's how they talk in the market, here's what they're looking for, but it's not always as direct in terms of the action you can get from someone. So I would say, I tend to still think there's a lot of opportunity in doing email right. And I think if we take the personalization thread all the way to its end, what we saw in the past years was all of marketing automation, right? Everything went to, I create all these workflows, you get this many emails from me over this set of time, and if you do this, you get a different kind of email. That's great, but it's super impersonal. So what you're going to continue to see is the movement back toward actual email that comes from someone in the organization to you, direct appeal, gets very hard to ignore. So I think you're going to see a lot of people trying to figure out how to do that and how to scale that approach.
Great. Another question we had, again, about communicating and using email. One of our nonprofits, they've really chosen to stay the course and continue to communicate with their donors, both digitally and through regular mail. And they say that they've seen success with them. What are your feelings on regular mail? And is it effective?
I mean, I'll start by just diving in saying, communications now is all about micro-targeting. So it's understanding who your donors are, who your constituents are, and where do they live, And the reality is some live on email, some still live on direct mail, and others want to live in social domains. But again, it's starting to dig into the data. And that's one of the positives is now we do have a ton of data exhaust that's kicked off. So we can look at direct mail open response rates, but we can also look at click-throughs as it relates to email. And so, and the same goes for social feeds. So it's really taking the time to mine the data, understand who your micro constituents are, where do they live online, how do they like to best consume information online, offline.
Yeah, I would just say okay. There's been this, I think everything went digital in past years, not just now, but prior to this, there was always that idea, print's dead, right? That was always the thing people were saying. And I don't believe that's true. I think these are all new tools that they're different versions of the same thing. And if you believe that your audience is varied, then you have to talk to them in different ways. And that is still a very effective tool. So I would just, the one piece I would say is don't write off a category. Don't say, nope, print's gone, or we don't do print advertising, we don't do direct mail. They can be effective, but to Travis's point, use the data the same way you would a digital platform to gauge the effectiveness.
And I think to a certain extent, I mean, there's a lot of people home right now. I used to stack up my mail and read it on Saturday morning, and now I read it every day, and my kids help me open it. So, something that may have seemed out of trend 6 months ago can still be super effective.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to re-examine is it a mass communication or is it a targeted communication?
It's a good question. Yeah.
Definitely. So the next question is a little bit about donor development and kind of the demographics, which is a good segue. So what would your advice be for an organization to gain younger donors to meet their needs when you traditionally have an older or minimum age donor base, middle age, sorry. So kind of attracting younger people to their donor base. What would your recommendation be for that?
I'll start by simply making the comment that we know through both primary and secondary source research that younger donors are shying away from the fund-to-fund model, and that is driving some of their personal funding through other large organizations that then fund smaller organizations. And we know from the data that they want to touch, feel, and be more directly connected to those organizations, those individuals that they are funding. And you can see it in some of these business to consumer models where it's, buy a sock, give a sock, buy a shoe, give a shoe, all the way down to, if they're going to work for Habitat for Humanity or another organization, they don't just want to give the money, but they want to be able to go swing a hammer or at least go visit that structure when it's done and see the impact they're making in the community. And so that's kind of a long-winded way of saying is they want to be directly connected to the end result of their giving versus simply giving to larger organizations that then want to spread it out across a wider net.
I really agree with that. I think that what we find is that, and I mentioned this before, sort of like this grassroots and organic approach is, nonprofits always want and need to be good stewards of their funds and need to respect and mindful in communicating and reporting back to any funding source or any donor. I think the younger generation wants to really feel ownership over what they're contributing to and be able to point towards that. And, you know, I don't think they're as responsive to some of the historic, like tried and true methods of, you know, mass communications and check writing, right? It's Venmo, it's online platforms. It's, you know, how can I do it easy without having to even move from, you know, sitting and looking at my mobile.
Those are great points.
And it's micro, you know, they are so primed for the kind of micro donation idea, where different than I think how a lot of organizations think about that pathway for donors, starting them at different levels, get them in the door at the $20. Like, can you get them to somehow connect in a very, very small way and then build from there? And then I think when you couple that with some of that more peer-to-peer strategy of like, there's a game to that, right? That's like, people like engaging in that. They get to show it. They get to look at the numbers. They get to see their friends help them hit those targets. I think those strategies are really meant for a different generation.
Okay, we're pushing right up on our end time, but we had a couple questions on donor fatigue, which I think, you know, address before we wrap up. So, you know, there's obviously concerns about donor fatigue, and, you know, once we kind of get through this crisis, annual giving is still needed to organizations to meet goals. Do you view that there is a possibility to kind of still meet those, I guess, benchmarks now that so many people are donating to causes outside of their normal causes?
So that's a tough question. I mean, I think my instinct is to pick up a Lauren's thread about meeting people where they are and show me as an organization that you're adapting in some way. You know, I think what people respond to now is people who took action. So not that you have to suddenly like change what your organization is about, but show how that work. There was a comment earlier about the universality of all this, and I really like that. And I think what that is, this is so unique in that it touched everyone. So if that's the case, whatever you're doing, well, you know, whether it's in the mental health space, whether it's in the food scarcity landscape, everybody got touched. So you have to have changed in some way. Show me how you change. Show me how you're still relevant. And I think that's how you re-engage. My sense is the fatigue will hit when someone says, you're saying that was the same email I got from you last year. Like, and the world's different now. So as long as you acknowledge that, I do think people will recommit to you as the new version of your organization.
I think that's where you go bold, like you said earlier, John, right? Like go bold and then show people how you went bold or how you innovated. And that I think helps people vision with you for what people look like on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, and I would just double down on, you know, sort of mass communications, mass requests are what create the fatigue. But again, if you can take your constituents, drill in and really understand who they are and put them at the center of the journey and take them along with you, you have a much greater chance of conversion and keeping them connected.
Great. Well, I just want to take another opportunity to thank all of you again for joining us on the call, especially John, Travis, and Lauren for all of your insights and feedback today. I also want to thank our sponsors that made this webinar possible: NJM Insurance Group, Republic Bank, Stradley Ronan, and Stevens & Young. And just a quick reminder that we will be sending out an email later today with information from this session, including the recording. So if you missed any portion or you want to share it with others, please feel free to do that. We'll also be posting it on our website, so you can access it there as well. You'll also receive a survey, so please take a few minutes to complete that, because we really take your feedback to heart in planning our future programs, and it's really a valuable tool for us. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend and has a great opportunity to get outside and enjoy the weather. So happy Friday and be well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye, guys. Thank you.